It's lovely to see all of you. It's a full circle for me. I started my gaming career right here in Hyderabad, and coming back and talking to everyone is very humbling experience. So before I begin, this is what I want to start with. Did you know like 90% of the games that launch fail in the first year? And why is that? And that's something that I'm going to hope and try and cover during this session. And hopefully there are some takeaways that I want you to drive home with this session. And hopefully with the session, I also want you to feel free to ask tough questions. And I don't want this to be like a Q&A at the end, but if you have a question during any slide, just lift your hand up, and I'm hopefully going to answer that question. Right? So why is that? Right? And before I begin, here are some of the games I've worked for. I've killed more games than I've shipped, so I have a little authority on how to kill games. Maybe not as successful, but I've killed games with really high retention numbers also. And here are some companies that I've worked for. And right now I'm at Rovio, heading their prototyping division and also the new games division. Right, so at Rovio, what we started doing at a stage where the studio was like, we have Angry Birds 2. What do we do now? Right, do we continue to make Angry Birds 2 spin-offs? Do we try and diversify? If you do, how do we approach that? And one question that we tried to answer all the time, as you guys are already aware, that it took 45 failed games for Angry Birds to become a hit. And that's the culture we have at the studio. We always try to keep pushing the envelope with how we approach innovation, how we approach creativity, and how we approach prototyping. Right? So for us, a definition of prototype would always mean that it's an experiment that we put out there. And we always try to disprove that rather than trying to say, we're trying to prove this is going to be fun. We try our level best to say this is not going to work. And if it works out, then that's what we aim for. So why did we go with prototyping, right? So like I mentioned, with Angry Birds 2, we had really good cash flow, and we were like, why change the status quo? Let's continue making what we are good at. Let's make slingshot games. But we still have very creative team members. We always want to try and push that envelope with prototyping. But we have challenges. We had a lot of challenges in terms of how the market was evolving. But if you see this, back when we were talking about this, the entire industry was on a downhill compared to 2021 first half to 2022 first half. As you can see, each genre was declining. And it became even more evident that if we don't go across genres and we stick to just one genre, in this case, Angry Birds does classify as arcade and puzzle. It's very in between. It's still arcade, I guess. So that's where we were, and we were trying to see how can we get into this. So we looked at it and we said, should we not approach any of these genres? If you do, how do we go about that? So that was the first challenge. And then the second challenge was the UA aspect of it. The CPIs were off the roof, and now the UA scene is even more detrimental. It's very brutal, where the CPIs are just going up and ROAS is being pushed far in the life cycle of the player. The other challenges that we had was this conception that, let's just make game, players will come, right? So this is something that we were dealing with at the time, and this is something that we also wanted to challenge the status quo of the team. And for which we did a lot of investigations within the studio and surveys. And just like any other studio, just because we are Rovio, that doesn't mean we don't have budget constraints. So every studio has this, and we had it too, in terms of how much do we invest in new games, how much do we invest in the games that are generating revenue, and there was no consensus on this. So the reason I'm talking about this is I just wanted to lay the ground that the challenges that a small studio faces, a big studio like Rovio also faces these challenges. And majorly we had these, right? Because we had passionate teams, we had designers who were veterans in the industry, and we had creative people from all around. Everyone wanted to do something really innovative. Everyone wanted to try and create something that has never been existing, right? And for that, when the reason we came to know that there is a misalignment is we asked the teams, what do we want to build? Do we have the technical expertise to build that? Do we have the teams to build that? So we ran multiple surveys within the studio, and we found out that everyone wanted to build World of Warcraft because everyone played that game. And the next set of surveys was, do we have the technical expertise to build that game? And the straight out answer was, no, we don't have the technical expertise to build a World of Warcraft from Rovio. And the third set of surveys was, do we have the appetite to build it? Like, do we have a team of 500 people and millions of dollars of budget to build that? And the answer was no. So how did this approach help? What are the decisions that we had to make to come to a place where we said, okay, we want to build path-breaking games. We have these challenges. How do we go about overcoming these challenges? Right? So we started with ideation. And the reason I want to talk about this is because it was one of the most productive ways of approaching idea generation. So I'm going to cover everything that's red maybe in the future slides. But what I'm trying to show is that whenever, this is again an average, whenever we did an ideation, there were close to 50 to 100 ideas that were generated. And we built a matrix of constraints that I'm going to show a little later that actually filtered these ideas down to saying, can we build it? Do we have technical expertise? So these were all the filters that we put in place that helped us make that decision. And when it came to concept, like from out of 35 ideas, only 4 reached the concept stage. And why is that? I'll also cover that. It's basically talking about what are the key things that we look for when we talk about, is this concept ready to be prototyped? And out of those 4 concepts, again, 2 make it to marketability tests, where we put the UA out, where we test the creatives and see, is this something players really want? Is this something that players are excited about? And do we have the CPIs that we can afford? And from there, again, we do a test release where we figure out if we have the prototype. Then we run the prototype and see what the retention numbers are, early conversion, session length, number of sessions in the target market. And from there, maybe one product goes to pre-prod. So we had a very strict filter, and that was something that the team came up with. It was a very bottom-up approach, not something that execs sitting in the headquarters came up with. So, and also it helped us align the vision because of the ideas that were generated and the way we were shortlisting these ideas. It became very clear to the team, what does the studio want to build? Is it another Angry Birds game, or is it another match game? So it became very clear where the studio focus was, and the team started to synergize with what kind of product we want to build with the process that we had. One of the key things during this process when we were looking at concepts that we tried to do with the teams was use Quantic Foundry's player motivation, the 12 traits of player motivation. This was very important for us because whenever we set out to build new games, we have a perception that this is what we think players will like. And when you put the game out to players and you see the retention tank, or rather you don't see the retention at all, and everyone in the game team is like, we still believe in this, this is fun, even though the retention is down. But what we need to understand is what we think players like versus what players actually like could be 2 different things. And we had to be open to that idea. And the way we approached this was we took this Quantic Foundry's player motivations and we asked the team to select 3 player motivations that we thought players wanted to see in a game. And we did the same thing with players when we put the surveys out and players took these surveys. And if players picked the same ones that we did, then we had the synergy. Okay, we were giving players what they wanted. But if players picked that they were looking for competition, they were looking for strategy, and they were looking for destruction because it was coming from Rovio, and Angry Birds is famous for destroying the piggy castles. And then it became very clear that, okay, what we want players to experience versus what players wanted to experience were completely 2 different things. So we had 2 options here. Either we pivot to what players wanted, or we continue the testing and find an audience that fits this player motivations. So whichever was in line with the studio strategy, that's the path that we took. And this kind of helped. So if you have not looked at this, please do. It's a very useful tool to align expectations within the team. And if you have the resources to do it with players, or even if you have a community on Twitter or Discord, it's always good to kind of run this pass with the players as well. And what this helped us is look at even ideation and prototyping from a very data-infused approach, where we took the results from marketability, we took the results from the A/B tests and player surveys and the UA tests. So, and then kind of channel that into the discussions for greenlighting games. So the path that I showed, the filters, so these are all the things that we factored in making that decision to shortlist a game. And this was done by the studio leadership, and it was kind of done in a very transparent way. Everyone in the studio kind of knew why certain games or ideas were being pushed forward or certain ideas were put on back burners. Because we believe that there are no bad ideas. Either the idea is ready for the market now, or the market is not ready for this idea. So we believe that there are no bad ideas as such. And the one metric that we tracked when we were testing ideas and concepts was time to fun. So whenever we released a game, we had gameplay for 2 days. With the next update, we had the gameplay for 3 days. And with the next update, we had the gameplay for 7 days and 40 days and so on and so forth. And what happens in this is with every update that you do, players mature. They go from new users to maybe intermediate players to experienced players. And that's where it becomes important to understand what fun means to a new player could be completely different from what a player who has played the game for 3 days understands what the meaning of fun is. Even though fun is not something that is tangible or something that we can track, we always looked at session length and number of sessions to understand how different cohorts of players engaged with the gameplay. And when we tested these games, we had run these games maybe for 14 to 30 days to understand how the player experience changes over time. And this is kind of a useful tool to understand what is the time to fun, right? So this is again a God metric that I use in my team. So if you don't, or if you have not used this, I highly recommend, look at the day 0 of the first install. So whenever we look at retention, we look at the day 0 retention or day 1 retention, which is a cumulative of all the sessions on day 1. And you club all of them and say, okay, 100 players played the game yesterday and 50 players came back today, right? But if you look at day 0 first install data, you'll understand that players who started the game, 100 players who started the game, how many actually dropped off in the first session. And most often you'll be surprised that 100 players who start the game, 70% of them drop off or churn out in the first session. They do come back in the second session, but you do lose out on the 70% of the players in the first session. So first session data of day 0 new install is really critical, especially when you're testing new games. So that's something that I would highly recommend to track, and that's my God metric for new games. I hope you find it useful as well. So the other thing that we spent a lot of time when it came to ideation was de-risking the game. So again, this is something that I'll try and cover in the later slides. Sorry if I'm rushing because there's so many slides that I wanted to cover. I hope I'll do justice. So it was about, should we build the core first or should we build the meta first, right? Is the core innovative enough that players want to experience the core, or it's another match 3 game, players already know the core gameplay, so should we build the meta? So this was again a point where we had to talk about risks of what happens if you build the core. Players will say, oh, this is another match 3 game, so what's new about it? And if you build the meta first, then players would have to stick around until the meta unlocks. So these are the few things that we tried to talk about and de-risk it. And this is where we kind of put that into a matrix and then try to understand how to go about this. Should we build the core or should we build the meta? Because as we all know that building a core is a different piece of approach, and building a meta is a completely different beast because you need to be very confident with the core that you build the meta on. So this was a very important discussion and a decision that we had to make when it came to prototyping. And we were always on the path of building conviction and validation because that's something that we think it's very critical. If you're just trying to prove numbers, then you will prove the numbers, but you will not have the validation from players. So validation was very important for us, and that too from players and the community. And to approach this, innovation was really important for us. Like the way we approach innovation was a multi-fold approach, where we had the product-led, design-led, and the market-led. So what does that mean? Is in the world of Rovio, design-led would be something like we already know that there are no competitors for Angry Birds 2. It's a standalone game out there that players, or there could be other games like that, but players know that, oh, this looks like Angry Birds, right? If you make another slingshot, then players would know that this is another slingshot. And then, of course, the CPIs would be low. It would give a high ROI. And then if we had to go product-led, meaning that the product has to be something that the players have never seen, then you would probably have to pump in a lot of money to make sure that the players, or rather the game reaches a lot of players. And then market-led would be something, do we have a big IP, but do we also need to go after big IPs to make the game aware? So these are the discussions that we were very critical about when we were making a game, even for the fact that should we make another Angry Birds game because we have the IP, or should we try to look at it from a different perspective of players who played Angry Birds, what other games do they play? So that's something that we did. We looked at what are the players playing and how do we cater to their needs. So this kind of helped us to see what is the approach. And I'm a big fan of how, this is something that I learned from Zynga of 30, 30, 30, 30% proven, 30% better, and 30% new. So and I try to infuse this in my teams as well, is basically saying that if you have a proven product out there, you take 30% of what's proven. If you know match 3 works, you take, again, percentage is very subjective. So I'm not saying you have to take only, if there are 10 features, you take 3 features out of that and then put that in. But it's very subjective. Like if you take 30% of what's working and what resonates with player, and with your design and creative teams, think about how you can make that experience better, right? If you're, for example, Homescapes or Gardenscapes, they took match 3 and they put a decoration meta on it, right? So for me, that's 30% better. And 30% new is something that you want to introduce to players in this particular genre. So that's the approach that we try to infuse with our teams, or rather I try to infuse with our teams. And that has significantly worked in how we look at innovation in that aspect. Again, talking about innovation, the way we try and talk about this in my studio is, so we have known audience. We know, when I say known audience, we know how they behave, how they play the game, how they engage with the game, and that's Angry Birds 2. And we thought about, hey, how can we scale this to a new audience? Again, doing a lot of studies on player insights on how we look at new audience and understand, is there an appetite for them to consume new Angry Birds content? So that's how the birth of Dream Blast happened, where we tested a lot of concepts. And then that's where we were able to cater the Angry Birds IP to a new audience. And when we talk about innovation, that's where we, as game developers and creative folks, would like to be. One of the most innovative products, according to me, that we created was Angry Birds Evolution. How many of you have played Angry Birds Evolution or heard about it? Okay, very few. So there you go. And it's a niche product, very few people kind of consume it. So it's a slingshot game, but from a different perspective. So in that setting, you pull the bird back and it just, like a pool ball, it just goes and hits all the piggies. That was a very innovative product, and it was under an RPG genre. So that's when I say, when you make innovative products, you have to find your niche. And with that product, we did find a niche, but not as much as we did with Angry Birds 2 or Dream Blast. So you have to be very clear when you're approaching innovation. When you build products that players have never seen, you also have to be ready that this is a product that players might not play also, right? So when everything starts with the idea, we try and answer this question, which is very important for us. Like, who is going to play this game? You have a question? Yeah. Who's going to play? When I say this, it doesn't mean that we're just talking about the demographics. We're talking about which region. But within Angry Birds, again, at the risk of sharing this information, when we looked at Angry Birds 2, we found out there was a subset of players that were churning out. And we tried to understand why. And we tried to understand from a UA perspective where these players were coming from. And we figured out through multiple sessions and analysis that we did, we found out that the players that were coming and playing this game were players from a puzzle genre. And when they came to the game, they expected a puzzle game because the way the ads were catered. And we figured that there is a huge subset of these players are coming to the game, playing the game, and then quitting and never coming back. What can we do to make them stay? So the teams tried a lot, but they were not successful. But in the end, what we figured is we need to create a different experience either within the game or outside the game to make them stay within the Rovio network. And that gave birth to the game called Angry Birds Journey, which is Angry Birds 2, but in the form of a puzzle game. Right? So that gave rise to a new product. And that's what I mean by you need to understand who will play this game. If you have an existing product and if you're making a franchise out of it, I'm going to make match 1 and now I'm going to make match 2. Make sure that it doesn't cannibalize your original game. Right? You need to find the audience within the game. And also when we approach new features, we try to talk about this in a way that if you're making a new feature, who is going to play this? Is this going to be new players? Are there going to be D7 players or D30 players? Or is this feature built for elder players? So that conversation is really important, and this transcends across new games and live games. We do talk about demographics, which is very important for casual games. You need to have a persona. That's something that we try and build with this information. And something that we also talk about is where they're going to play this game. Right? Because now, as the industry is moving, we do see revival of the browser games coming back. So are they going to play on the web? If they're not going to play on the web, but does this create the platform for us to go on the web? Do they play on Android? Do they play on iOS? If they do that, how are they going to engage with that experience? And once we finally understand where they're going to play, we try and answer this question. Are they going to use just one hand to play the game? Are they going to sit back, lounge on a sofa, and then play the game? So this information or these discussions actually inform the design team. How long should the session be? If I'm playing with one hand, I expect the players to be on a commute, going somewhere, walking. And should my session be 5 minutes? Or should it be a bite-sized session of 20 seconds, 30 seconds? Like if you played Candy Crush, you'd know that you can clear 11 in less than 1 minute. And you can play it with one hand, right, and just a thumb. When you play Angry Birds, you have to play it in landscape. You have to use two hands, and you have to sit down, right, because you can't aim while you're walking. So those are the critical things that we talk about during the ideation process. And this helps us be very clear with what we're trying to build and who are we trying to cater. And the second thing that helps us make better decisions is how are players going to play this game, right? Are we thinking about experience that's driven by community? Is it social? Is it going to be something players have to interact with each other? Is it going to be synchronous, asynchronous, multiplayer? And this not only informs just the creative team, but also the technical teams, where they have to come in at this stage and say, hey, we cannot build a multiplayer game right now because we don't have the ecosystem. And that gives more empowerment to the team to make that decision. Okay, should we make this game now and wait for the tech team to get a head start and then we come back to this game 6 months from now? Or we just kill this game because we're not going to do this, right? So that's what I meant when I said we've killed more games than we have shipped. These discussions actually helped us refine the approach that we take during the ideation. And also, when I talk about platform, we also try and see how is the player session going to be like. Do we want the players to have like an endless experience, or should they have fixed session where, that informs should there be an energy system or should there not be an energy system? Should this be an idle gameplay where they, just leave the game and go and then come back 24 hours later and, their inventory is full with collection? And then also where will they engage with this? And especially if you're targeting younger generation, they like to play this game across platforms. So for example, I'm not sure if a lot of people here play Fortnite, but if you look at Fortnite and the persona that Fortnite has, Fortnite players expect the game to be everywhere they have their friends on. So if my friends are on, PlayStation, the game should be available on PlayStation. If my friends are on, PC playing Steam, then the game should be available for me on PC, and so is with any other console, and so is with mobile, right? And those are the decisions you have to kind of be very critical about at an early stage. And post this discussion, it became very important for us to, okay, fine, all these filters are there. We've shortlisted. We've had 50 ideas, and now we've shortlisted few concepts. And so, what is going to be our MVP? So when we approach an MVP discussion, it's not just about here is a feature set of 5 features or 10 features, but we approach this as an opportunity for us to talk about what is the problem that we are trying to solve. Can we solve multiple problems with this? For example, the example that I shared with the Angry Birds 2 puzzle audience. So it was a way for us to cater to not only puzzle audience, but also create and diversify Angry Birds 2 into Angry Birds Journey. So that was something kind of very interesting for us to kind of experience with defining the MVP. And we take this across not just new game ideation, but also when you talk about features and live operations. So this is one example of how we approached prototyping. So on the left is the first prototype that we made in 2 days. So the concept was that you would have a sword that would go around, and then you have to tap at the right time in the pie. And if you tap in the blue, then it's a hit. And if you tap at the right time and the sword is on the red pie, then that's a critical hit. So we tested that with the team, with the core team, and said, hey, this is fun. This could be something that we can, take forward. And again, the design team said, what if we have heroes on this and they were enemies? And now instead of just one part of the circle that was active, what if we have multiple sections where players could tap and then, create a hit? And we tested that again. And if players hit in the red section, which was a critical hit, they would get a bonus. And you could select. So if you selected the green hero, then the circle would change green. If you selected the blue hero, the circle would change blue. And each hero had a different circle. And we said, okay, now we have an ugly prototype. Sorry for using that term. There's no prototype that's ugly, but we call it ugly prototype because we used whatever we had. We didn't say we want to create new art, but we just took what we had and just prototyped it. And the third screen, that's where the concept team came in. And we spoke about what the concept is, what we're trying to drive. And that's where they created a GIF, right? And to showcase of what it could look like if it was a game. And then once the initial concept was kind of like, this looks nice, let's explore it further. And at this point, the art team was doing UX in a way that they were looking at other games, they were researching other games and trying to see how we can fit this inside this game. And finally, when we did the fourth screen, the confidence level in the team was very high, saying that this is something really innovative that the players have never seen. This mechanic has never existed. We're going to do that. And then this is one of those ideas that came down to one of the ideas that we tested. And this is how the idea ended up being, from the ugly prototype to the fact that we tested this game out live. And it turned out that this game was something that the players didn't want. Right? After months and months of hard work, we still had to be open to the idea that players thought this was highly skilled for them. This is something that the players said, like, yeah, it looks good, but I don't want to play this game. Right? Which is heartbreaking, but at the same time, that's the nature of game development, right? It's something that we keep trying. So the way we approach this later on, sorry if this is too noisy, but what I wanted to drive with this slide was that we looked at proven cores, we looked at unproven cores, we looked at hybrid cores. Like proven core, for example, for the lack of creativity, let's say a proven example is a Candy Crush game, right? It's a match 3 game. Unproven core would be something that I just showed you. We called it Battle Blast, I think. Yeah, I think we call it Battle Blast. And that was an unproven core. Players have never seen it. And then there was a hybrid core like Gardenscapes, Homescapes, where they took match and they took decoration and they clubbed it together. So, and with the teams, what we try to understand is if you're approaching a proven core, how should we go about it? If you're approaching an unproven core, should we make a prototype? Should we test it? Because if you have a proven core, it's already validated. Candy Crush is already validated. You don't have to go out and prove match 3 works. You need to find what works for your audience with that genre. So that's what we tried to understand with the proven core. And with the hybrid core, it was a hybrid way of approaching it. So what I'm trying to say is this is what worked for us to make those critical decisions. I would urge each and every team to kind of have these discussions about, how are we approaching something that's certain and how are we approaching something that's uncertain from both market perspective and players' perspective. Right, so this is something that I spoke about earlier, the matrix of constraints. I'll walk you through very quickly. So when we talked about core, we said, is it fresh? Is it approachable? Approachable in the sense, is it simple enough for the players to just pick up and play it? Or if it requires a tutorial, we don't want to make it. Right? So that was a clear, unspoken rule that we came up with. If it requires a tutorial, we don't want to make it. It fits the player needs and motivations. The 12 Quantic Foundry traits is the meta focused on players and accessible. I'll not go through all of them, but I just want to, you can read these, but meta, this was a very critical one. Should we go with the proven core and a new meta, or should we go with a proven meta and a new core? Because the idea with the Battle Blast game was that, we're going to build the meta that players already know. So they're going to be heroes, you can level them up, each hero would have their own RPG mechanic behind that, and that's something players know, and this is the core that they have never seen, right? So again, going back to the point of let's just build games and players will come, that misconception also was broken with that initiative, right? And then with art, we wanted to be very clear that we don't want to build art that was expensive. We didn't want to have like heavy pipelines, because again, this is mobile game development. I'm not sure a lot of console folks are here as well. But from a mobile games perspective, we didn't want heavy pipelines where artists have to spend a lot of time to generate one asset, because we wanted to be very quick to testing. And we also wanted to avoid third parties and third-party IPs, and making sure that we always go 3D versus 2D, because from a prototyping perspective, 3D assets can be reused later in other games or other prototyping initiatives rather than 2D, because a lot of time would go into making these assets, and most often they don't end up being used by other games. And from a tech perspective, some of the key things that we nailed down was we don't want to build a game that was driven by a real-time server. We don't want to use any unproven tech. And that also informed the design team. So no AR games, no VR games that we wanted to go after, and hopefully use the existing engines that we had wherever applicable. And from a production perspective, it was very strict in terms of how we were budgeting this. So if it was not possible to go to market within 6 months with a team of 6 to 8 people, there itself, the idea would be rejected. And also, if you can't take that concept that we greenlit, if it can't go to soft launch in 12 months with a team of 15 people, then itself the idea would have been put on a back burner. And if the prototype was not possible in 4 weeks, then we said, no, we're not going to build this, because if it takes more than 4 weeks to build a prototype, then it's a complex game for us to visualize. So these were some of the key things we talked about within the game. And outside the game, we collaborated with the marketing team to understand what the player needs are, and these were given by the marketing team to make sure that we align with the studio strategy. And also from an industry perspective, we wanted to make sure that the games that we're making, the concept that we're greenlighting, have a high potential in terms of reach, in terms of the business that we're going to make, and we didn't want to compete with the games that we had originally. So we didn't want to make another slingshot game that would compete with Angry Birds 2. Right? So and for this, we tried everything. We made paper prototypes because there were a lot of board gamers. So we took all the meeples and we prototyped a lot of games. We used paper prototype, we used PPTs, we used tools like Figma also to visualize certain concepts. And then finally, if it was not possible with these three approaches, we reached out to engineers to help us. Because even engineers wanted to understand what we were trying to build. And if you are not able to showcase your vision to an engineer, they was like, I don't have faith in this. I don't know what will happen. If you want me to build it, I'm not going to build it if I don't have faith in it. So that's how we worked. Everyone on the team was equally involved. It was not that, oh, engineers are supposed to build, so they should build. But everyone on the team had a say in what we were building. So that's something that was very critical, that we always had to start with why. And if the why was not clear, we never proceeded with any of the concepts or any of the ideas that we had. So yeah, that concludes my talk. And I believe in something that I came up with is that the purpose of prototyping is that our concept dies instead of our games, because I think that approach has helped us kill more games than ship more games. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me during the talk. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Hi. In one of those slides, you showed that you were surveying your players to see whether what they wanted aligned with what you thought they wanted. And a concern that usually pops up with this is that, are you actually surveying your players, or are you surveying just that vocal minority who's going to answer these forms? So what I want to ask is, did you have these concerns, and how well did those surveys actually work for you?
That's a very interesting question, and yes, that happens to us a lot, because when you put a survey out either on Discord as a form, or if you put that out on Twitter as a form, no one completes the survey. They would just look at one or two questions and then they would drop off. We had more incomplete surveys than complete surveys, and that's the tragedy of asking players what they want, because even players sometimes don't know what they want. They just want something different, right? But for us, it was not just about selecting the right options, but they actually wrote what they didn't like about certain concepts. And that came as feedback saying, okay, this is not something that we should definitely not build this, rather than we should build what players are saying. But it helped us what not to build. And that kind of informed the design team on how to approach that. And at the same time, it was something that was incomplete data. So we never made life-changing decisions based on surveys. We took that as information. We took that as directional data. Okay, this is where the players' heads are, and let's try and explore this. If it's challenging, then we try and understand where the challenge is. And if it becomes really clear that the players are really excited about this, then that also becomes really clear. So we always take player data with a pinch of salt, a huge grain of salt. That it's not going to be accurate 100% of the time, but definitely helps us understand where players are in that moment of time.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Right.
Thanks for nice presentation.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm IT industry. So I'm leading e-learning team.
Okay.
So my question is, if I want to satisfy different age groups like senior associates or junior associates and the freshers, and if I want to develop any game to satisfy all target audience, so what kind of games you suggest? What is the best method to create games?
I think when you say senior associates, it's within your team?
Yeah, within organization.
Okay, so I think that's something that we try to understand with the surveys that we did within our studios. Like, we asked everyone in the studio, what kind of games should we build? What is the studio that we wanted to mimic? Because when the moment we asked that question, it was kind of obvious that everyone wanted to be like Supercell. Right? Everyone in the team said, "Oh, we should be like Supercell. We should, kill more games." But the path to that was unclear. So how do we kill games? Okay. For that, do we need to have games to kill games, or do we have to have ideas to make sure that we are on that path? So I would recommend build a path to having that discussion. Like within your team, ask what kind of games. I'm guessing e-learning is targeted towards kids and a younger generation. If you're heading in that direction, you need to understand what your audience wants, what your players want.
So my audience are all levels. Like if you take any IT industry, right? So we have different generation associates in the team, and we have to cover global audience also.
Yeah.
And it's more about learning related.
Yeah, I mean,
So
learning is different in different regions. Like the Middle East learns differently.
correct.
Folks in US learn education differently, and in India it's completely different. So it goes back to the point of understanding the audience better and then creating the experience that they think are welcoming to their culture.
Okay, thanks.
So I basically wanted to ask, like, when you come up with a concept, I often find that I have a huge list of things that I
Yeah.
want to incorporate into my game. So for the purpose of prototyping, what are the concepts? What helps you to decide, okay, for the prototype, these are the concepts that I am going to implement? And what does your typical process of prototyping look like?
Actually, that's a very good question and a very practical question. And we try and answer this in a very simple way, or easy to say, but hard to execute is what are we trying to prove, right? When you test a prototype, you're trying to prove something. You're trying to see that do players enjoy this, and how does enjoyment lead to something that we can track? Enjoyment, does it lead to players want to play this every time their energy is filled? They come back, so you see number of sessions have gone up. You see, oh, players love this game. They have played the game for 30 minutes without stopping. So the session length is 30 minutes, and then you compare it with your competitors, or if you don't have a competitor, then you put a benchmark saying, I mean, the industry standard is for a hit game, 30 minutes session and 3 sessions in a day, right? And if you're testing it out on App Store and Google Play Store, you put that game out there and you try and test it. But if you're doing it internally, you need to check the temperature with the team, with your studio. And if you have family and friends that play the game, I would highly recommend ending their session with a survey that helps you understand what their experience was like. So again, going back to the way we try to do it is what are we trying to prove with different prototypes? Because prototype could be core plus meta, prototype could be core plus meta plus 7 days of content, right? So there's still prototypes because you're still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. I would try and understand what are we trying to prove at each of these stages, and then try to shortlist what are the concepts that need to be. If you're trying to prove retention, are the retention features inside my shortlisted features? If I'm trying to prove engagement, do I have engagement features? So that's how we try and approach that challenge.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Okay.